Welcome to the Vectra AI platform, designed to stop identity threats and prevent future attacks. We start with the Respond page. This is where teams can find active threats in real time. In this demo, we're monitoring a large environment with thousands of human and non-human identities spread across Network AD, local credentials, Azure AD, M365, Copilot for M365, and Azure. These credentials include human and non-human identities. And despite that complexity of this environment, Vectra is only surfacing two alerts, and those alerts align with real threats. This is the power of Vectra's AI threat detections that reduce benign alert activity through various different means to only surface real threats. Now, the threat we're looking at here has a score of 100. This is driven by two things: the attack rating, which is based off of the execution of different MITRE techniques that have been observed, and the speed that those techniques are executed, and the importance of the system, which is inferred based off of either customer direct input or AI that actually understands the observed privilege of every identity in the system. This privilege monitoring is incredibly powerful and gives an insight into effectively the zero trust level privilege of an identity that's being monitored. Unlike Active Directory information, this is a more reliable zero trust view of the actual identity and a posture view that I'll show and talk through in a little bit. We can click into this identity to understand more about what this threat was doing. We can see activity spanning the gambit of where this identity was active. Azure AD, Copilot for M365, Exchange, SharePoint, Power Automate, the network itself, Azure AD again here, and Azure Cloud. If the attacker was active in AWS, AWS identity activity would also be able to be surfaced in the Vectra console. What you can do now is, if you want to dig in more, we can click on any of these detections and see what's going on. But what I'll do instead is click into the Instant Investigation tab, where we'll be able to see access to all the logs that underpin any of this activity across hundreds of different fields that are relevant here. We can see what the identity did in Azure, what it did in Azure AD, and what it did in the network AD here, as well as execution of its from the network in different domains. At any point in time, you could click here and go investigate further, and you'll be brought to a full-fledged investigation console with access to the identity data across the gambit, spanning AWS, Azure AD, M365, Network, and Microsoft Azure. Pivoting back to where we were, though, I actually want to click in and take a response action. I can click Lock Host Account, and I can disable the account on the network, revoke sessions, and lock the account in Azure. This can be done manually with these clicks, or I could have set up automation process based off of that urgency score. Any of those response actions could have also been automated using things like a SIM or a SOAR, which Vectra integrates into. Now, you've seen here how Vectra is stitched across identity, but Vectra doesn't just stitch across identity, it also stitches identity into network hosts. We can see that here in this specific detection, where the identity involved was actually active on a host machine on the network. What's really cool about Vectra is that every detection type, which spans multiple different MITRE techniques ultimately, has a detailed page with information graphics, details about baselines of the system, all the information you need to investigate, as well as detailed one-pagers that talk about what triggers, the root causes, and business impact of the threat that's been identified. Now, we landed on this page because I wanted to actually follow the stitching to a host that was involved in this threat as well. We can click into the host, and from here, we can see the full activity in the graph. But what I want to call out is that this identity threat was also active on the network as well, where not only was that identity being used in AD and those cloud pieces, local credentials were also used here, as well as credentials that were ultimately driving force for doing Kerberoasting in the environment. Once again, through response action, a SIM or SOAR could be used, or through, if there's a EDR in the system, it can be disabled through that. Because of Vectra's flexible integration platform, even if a SIM or SOAR are not available, through other integrations that the platform supports, simple tags can be used to block the host, either on the firewall or through other means that are hooked in terms of the integration set. Now, this is all about threat detection, but what about how Vectra helps address posture? Vectra's Discover dashboard lets teams investigate how identities are operating in Azure AD, Copilot for Microsoft 365, and Network to identify opportunities to improve and stop future threats. If we click into the Azure dashboard, you can see things like the total logins, failed logins, details about who's using Graph APIs, locations being leveraged, all things that ultimately can be actioned with simple described descriptions and details of who's involved that can improve and ultimately help stop a future threat in this environment. Now, this view here, this is just Azure AD. There's also perspectives about Azure that can be reviewed here, about identities that are active there, privileged identity management. All these different things are available to audit and review. Copilot for M365 was recently released, and this gives a different auditing posture of identities in that space, including the files accessed and detailed information there. This posture visibility extends also to the network, where you can see details about network identities that are active and see things like using weak credentials for NTLM, as well as, really notably, privilege identity auditing that I jumped to on the bottom here. You can see every single identity in the system through this perspective. This is a quick summary that lets you see the observed privilege and the overall activity. This identity monitoring here can be used to understand if there are identities that are over permission and fit outside of the zero trust bounds that you would want set for that identity. Vectra is unique in this privilege score, which applies to any network identity, human or non-human in the platform. Overall, this approach to doing identity security ensures that teams can stop threats and prevent future incidents effectively.